Hello, Amanda.
Hi.
Come in. Come in. Sit down. Thanks for coming to talk to me today. How long have you been driving, Amanda?
13 years.
Right. And what's driving like for you?
Usually I enjoy it, but sometimes it's stressful.
Right. Okay. And what was it like learning to drive, and how long did it take you?
Learning to drive, it was nerve-wracking.
And was it stressful then, taking your test?
Yeah, it was stressful. I was really nervous.
Right. Okay. Thanks for talking to me today, Amanda.
No.
Hello, Amanda.
Hi.
Come in. Hi. Sit down. Make yourself comfortable. Thanks for coming along today to talk to me. I hope that this sort of experience of us going to this interview this afternoon will be pleasant and interesting for both of us. As you know, the aim of the research really is to find out a little bit more about what people's experience of driving is like, particularly learning to drive and events around learning to drive, like taking your test, for example. And as I explained before in the participant information sheet, the reason that I've asked you is because I'm aware that you're a driver, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about what your own personal experience of learning to drive has been about. Now, I'm not expecting the interview to last very long, probably only about 10 minutes or so. And I just need to check out a few things with you before you get started. I know that when we spoke earlier you agreed to take part in the interview, but I just want to check that that's still okay with you.
Yes, it's fine.
Great, that's brilliant. Now, it's important to let you know that if you want to stop at any time or you want to take a break, you can. And if I was to ask you a question that you didn't want to answer, please feel free to just say, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about that. That's absolutely fine. And as we agreed earlier, the whole purpose of using this interview will be for the research, but also to use the interview for teaching purposes. Can I just check that's okay?
Fine.
Lovely, thanks. Do you have any questions for me before we get started?
No, I think I'm happy, yeah.
Okay, right, that's lovely then. Okay. Can you tell me how long you've been driving?
I've been driving for 13 years.
Right, gosh, 13 years, okay. And can you tell me something about the feelings that you associate with driving?
I think mainly when I'm driving, I really enjoy the freedom that I can just go where I want, when I want. And although it can be stressful when you get stuck in traffic, but when you go on public transport, you're very much waiting around and it can not turn up, and that's really frustrating. Right. So I really like the freedom that it gives me.
And you mentioned there about stress and it feeling stressful. Can you perhaps give me a bit of an example or tell me about a time when...
Just like when you can get stuck behind someone who's really slow, or there's a really bad traffic and there's nothing you can do, you're just stuck there and it can make you late, but you can't do anything, you just have to wait till the traffic moves on. That can be annoying.
Right, okay, that's great, thanks. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in finding out about are people's memories of their experiences. And in particular, the sort of stories that people tell of events that might happen to them or their experiences of certain times in their lives. And I particularly want to ask you about that in relation to your driving behaviour. What I'd like to ask you to do is to think back to a specific point in time when you were learning to drive. Maybe a specific experience or maybe a particular lesson, and tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I can remember when I was learning to drive in my car, but my mum had lent it to a friend because obviously I couldn't drive it on the road at the time. And so the deal was that they took me out for practice every week and they got to borrow the car. Right. Of course it caused a bit of a clash of interest because it wasn't in their interest for me to pass my test, because then they'd have to give the car back.
Right.
So when I was learning to drive, it made it a bit uncomfortable because he, I was kind of aware of that, and I felt sometimes he was a bit undermining of my driving rather than encouraging me, because he had his own, like I'm saying, he probably didn't want to have to give the car back. And I can also remember, he was really nervous eating sweets because I'd go too fast. I can remember approaching a dual carriageway too quickly and literally screeching like in a movie round, just barely having control of the car. So I think he tolerated quite a few incidences, near misses and stuff.
Right. Near misses, that's interesting. Tell me about it. What about a near miss?
Well, just, the driving a bit too fast and having to brake heavily and just inexperience really. And learning to have control of the car.
Okay. So that's two quite separate feelings. Remember when I asked you in the question before, you were talking about a feeling of freedom that driving gives you now.
Yeah.
How does that compare to that feeling and that feeling of that you're on about there about near misses?
I think I was desperate to pass my test because I lived in a small village, right, miles away from the nearest town. So it was really important for me to be able to drive to get to college. So I think there was sort of a real anxiousness to pass, and yet, learning to control a car can be really, difficult. Sort of understanding how gears and stuff work and how, learning what the speeds you should approach corners and whatever. So I think, I was looking forward to passing my test so I'd have that freedom.
Great, that's great, thanks. Okay, what I'd like to do now is get you to think back to the driving test itself.
Yeah.
Take some time to think about how you felt at the time of your test, and maybe about some of the events that happened in your test, and tell me the story of the test, perhaps by starting at the beginning and working your way through to the end.
Right. Well, I can remember on my test, just as we got out of the test centre, I stalled. I think everybody does that, so I was really nervous. So I think they kind of overlooked that. And then I can remember, I was doing my best because, as I said, I was really keen to pass and get on with driving. And I can remember thinking it was my first test, and most people don't pass their first test. So that made, I think in a way that makes you think, well, maybe I won't pass, or just do my best. And I remember approaching a roundabout, and there was a cyclist in the middle of the roundabout, and I was being really careful not to knock over cyclists, really checking and everything. And I forgot to signal when I left the roundabout, and I thought, he's going to mark me down that. But I actually think when I look back on it, I think he was really impressed that I was really concerned about being careful around the cyclist and making sure I didn't cut them up and stuff. And so I think that was although I forgot to do that, I think he was impressed by how I handled the situation. And I was glad that I didn't have to do parallel parking, because I found that really difficult. I think I did a 3-point turn, so that was a relief because I really struggled on that. So, apart from stall at the beginning and stuff, I think it went okay, and I was really pleased that I passed.
Right, oh great, it's passed first time.
Yeah.
Oh, smashing. That's wonderful. Okay, so you mentioned that time when you were going around the roundabout and you were trying to avoid the cyclist. What kind of feelings were going on for you then?
I think I was more concerned about not hitting the cyclist rather than thinking about signalling, which was, when you think of what a test in that you have to do, look in your mirrors and signalling, manoeuvring everything. And but I think he was impressed that I was more concerned about the cyclist rather than, the manoeuvres when I could have done something wrong and had an accident. So I think that was in my favour.
Yeah. How did it feel when you found out you passed then?
I was exhilarated. I was so happy. I went straight home and went round to the friend's house to tell me about it and passed the test. Can I have the car, please? And I was sort of like, great, well done, But yeah, it was great. And I went off for a drive. really felt free at last that I could go off and do things. So yeah, I was for a week. I was like, I want to live. Get something in the shop. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks ever so much for sharing that with me and talking to me about your experience. That's really all the questions that I have for you. Do you have any questions that you want to ask me?
No, I think I'm happy with that.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks very much.
Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com. Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com.
I've downloaded an app onto my phone to measure sound levels in this area. So, it's time to get some data. It's always good to do a risk assessment before you start. I'm safe behind this railing.
Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com. 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 Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com.
This is my primary data, recorded in decibels over the last few hours.
Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com. Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com.
The mode, median, mean, range, and standard deviation give us numerical information about the distribution of a dataset. Specifically, the mode, median, and mean are measures of center or central tendency, and the range and standard deviation are measures of spread. We will look at how we can determine the measures of center first. So suppose I took a random sample of 9 people and measured their heights. Now the mode of a data set refers to the data value that is most frequently observed. Notice how the number 154 appears 3 times in this data set. This means that the mode of this data set is equal to 154. Now the median refers to the data value that is positioned in the middle of an ordered data set. Students often forget that to find the median, your data must be first put into order. We usually order the data set from smallest to largest. We can clearly see that the number 154 is in the middle of the data set because there are 4 data points above it and there are 4 data points below it. So the median of this data set is equal to 154. When a data set is extremely large, it might be helpful for us to use the formula n plus 1 divided by 2. This formula tells us the position of the median. N refers to the total number of data values in our sample. We have a total of 9 values in our sample, so n is equal to 9, and 9 plus 1 is equal to 10, and 10 divided by 2 gives us 5. As a result, the median is equal to the value in the 5th position, which is equal to 154. Note that we could have counted from the bottom and we would still get the same answer as long as the data set is ordered. We always use the formula n plus 1 divided by 2 to find the position of the median. When we have an odd amount of data values, the median will always be apparent. However, if n is an even number, we see that we have 2 middle data points, and if we use the formula, we end up with 5.5. We see that there isn't a value in this position, so what we do is we take the arithmetic average of the 2 values beside this position, so we would have 154 plus 155 divided by 2, and we get an answer of 154.5. This value is in fact the value of the median for this dataset. The last measure of central tendency we will talk about is the mean. The mean is just another name for the arithmetic average. The formula of the mean is as follows. It is equal to the summation of all data values divided by the total number of data values. If our mean comes from a sample, we call it x bar. So to get the mean for this sample, we add up all the data values, and since there is a total of 10 values, we will divide by 10. As a result, we get a mean or x bar of 165.6. Let's quickly compare between the median and the mean. Both of these are measures of center, but they measure center in a different way. The median refers to the physical middle point, so for this dataset, the median would be equal to 12. Now the mean can be thought of as the balance point. If you calculate the mean for this dataset, you would get a value of 10. If these people were of equal weights, this is the position in which a seesaw would be balanced. Now let's talk about the measures of spread. This includes the range and standard deviation. Both of these values measure spread in a different way. The range is simply the maximum minus the minimum, so it tells us how much room a distribution takes. In this dataset, the range is equal to the largest number, which is 196, minus the smallest number, which is 139. As a result, the range is equal to 57. Now the standard deviation is computed using this formula. The formula looks a little complicated, but the calculation for the standard deviation is simple. We will calculate the standard deviation for the following dataset. I will create a table to help me with my calculations, and this table corresponds to the numerator of the formula. Notice how x bar is contained within the formula, so we should calculate this first. You should find that the mean is equal to 15.4. The formula says we need to subtract each value from x bar, so we do this on the table. 10 minus 15.4 is negative 5.4. 12 minus 15.4 is negative 3.4. 16 minus 15.4 is 0.6, and so on. The next step is to square what we have just calculated. Negative 5.4 squared is 29.16. Negative 3.4 squared is 11.56, and so on. The next step is to find the sum of what we have just calculated. You should find that this is equal to 75.2. Remember that we used this table to calculate the numerator of the formula, so we can now replace it with 75.2. From here, the formula should be pretty straightforward. N refers to the total number of data values, and there are 5 data values in this dataset, so N is equal to 5. We can simplify this and we end up with a standard deviation that is equal to 4.336. Now what does the standard deviation even tell us? The standard deviation tells us how close the values in a dataset are to the mean. For example, a small standard deviation indicates a small amount of variability for a given dataset. In other words, there will be a lot of values that are closer to the mean, which makes the distribution less spread out. In contrast, a high standard deviation indicates a high amount of variability for a given dataset. In other words, there will be a lot more values that are farther from the mean, which makes the distribution more spread out. The last thing we will talk about is variance. Variance is closely related to the standard deviation. The only difference between these two formulas is that the standard deviation involves taking the square root of the calculations, and for the variance, we don't take the square root. Also, notice how for the standard deviation, we denote it as s, and for the variance, we denote it as s squared. Both of these can be referred to as the sample variance and the sample standard deviation.
Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com. Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com. Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com. Purchase your beats now at beatsbysv.com.